Do that in our own individual way, through our individual talents, whatever those gifts may be. We do that. And the amazing thing about that is, it doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be big at all. I mean, we don't have to be a celebrity or someone who's really well known. If I'm mindful enough at the beginning of each day just to say hello from my heart space when I see you, that has much of an influence as anything that I can think of. And so when I think about kindness, and I think about what I can do, just an ordinary Joe, no pun intended, there's a lot. There's a lot. All I need to do is just to honor who I am, be authentic, and come with an open heart. Come with an open heart. I think that's one thing that attracted me to ions in the beginning. This is when I recognized how sincere Dr. Mitchell was when he decided to start ions back in 1973. Even though he was a scientist, he recognized that on the noetic side, that's where we're going to really make our leaps as far as humanity was concerned. And because of what he started in 1973, it now has spread global. And I think every one of us here in this room and elsewhere feel really blessed that we have an organization called IONS, Institute of Noetic Sciences. So I'm very honored to lead the Houston chapter. I'm really honored that y'all decided to come this evening. I'm just absolutely delighted. Now, Victoria Tai, let me speak about her just a little bit here. I love her dearly. She is a wonderful, wonderful young woman. And I think most of y'all have seen some of my write-ups and meetups and on Facebook about Victoria.
What?
I have. Maybe you have.
No.
Well, I didn't want you to see it because you might get embarrassed. But here's what I want to ask. I'd like to ask you to be here with an open mind. But more than that, please be here with an open heart as Victoria shares her story with us this evening. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Victoria Tai.
Hello, my name is Victoria, and I guess I'm here to tell you that I'm almost celebrating my 6th birthday. This month of June was my original birthday, as well as the time that I came into this body for the first time on Earth. And it was really funny because right now I have a homestay. I got a kid from Harvey Mudd Computer Science, and he's he's really scared of the real world, right? He's 21 years old. And we're studying the GREs together, and he's like, I don't really know if I can adult. And I'm sitting there really thinking about how I was at 21 years old, and if I had known what was going to happen to me, and how my sense of reality was going to be turned upside down, and how painful it was going to be, I would have burned all those books right then. And I wouldn't have really put so much stock in it. But, there he is, and I wish I could tell him, and I can't. He stays at my place, but I wish I could tell him that you really can't see the world in such a reductive way. It's not so simple. And the only adulting you have to do is to learn to keep going, the coping mechanisms, to accept the life changes that come your way, because they often look like loss and they often look like pain. And that's the only adulting you really have to do. Of course, he doesn't know how to cook broccoli, so I'm also helping him with that. But it is, when the real world reveals itself, and this is something I keep secret from most people, we have abilities beyond our wildest imagination, in subtlety as well as variety. And it's also a process of looking at the self and being accountable, being more responsible. It's not a big Disneyland of new world skills. It's really about, noticing what do I have to do here for everybody else because of it. Okay, so here's a peek at our talk. I called it Inform because I'm informing. I feel like it's really important to tell people about those who are going through an initiation process. I didn't have anybody, and nobody was there for me. And it's not the case that people like this don't need help. They are extremely vulnerable, and they are extremely scared, terrified, and it's very, very painful. And I feel that if I just tell a few people so that they know when somebody else goes through this, that it's okay. You are not psychotic. You don't need to be locked up, and you are not dying. That would have been worth my efforts today. And so a lot of this is my drawings, just because when I was trying to tell people what I saw, or what I experienced, what I perceived, it was so difficult to verbalize it and much more easier just to draw pictures. So my story is one of coming into physicality for the first time. I was so bewildered when I came into this body. I woke up strapped in it, transplanted, and the sun, air, gravity, time, none of that was familiar to me. Nothing. I hadn't known how to move when I first came in. So what I'll be talking about is, one, the duality of both seeing from that soul perspective and it being so vivid for me, as well as being a person with a story, right? Because in order to survive in this world, I've got to be Chinese, or I've got to be 36, and I've got to be such and so person, so that people can identify me. But my name wasn't Victoria. I didn't respond to Victoria for a very long time when people called me that. On the other side, they have another way of communicating. And so it's been difficult to integrate both identities at the same time when they are so vastly dissimilar. And so I'll talk about that difficulty, who I was before, then what it was like coming into physicality, and the first 2 years or so of struggle, and now how I perceived people, how I perceived Earth world, and I'm sorry I'm cracking because I had post-traumatic stress disorder from this. I mean, it's only been very recently that this happened, and I think about the first time that I feel like this is a therapy session, really, a free one, because I do go to therapy for it. I didn't know what to do with it, and to be coherent while speaking from the heart is is a challenge for me right now. But I'll talk about the gradual unfoldment and where I am right now. Okay. So, when Joe told me I was speaking, I half expected everyone to see me like Principal Skinner there. A lot of times, I'm not informed. I don't feel like I'm always in this body. I can shapeshift. I often find out things or find lost things by expanding myself quite wide and going, okay, where are the Easter eggs, or where's the lost keys? And there will be information, and I'll come back in. So what I'd like to talk about is that eternal self, which has very different properties. Movement is very, very different when you are not in body. It's not about getting from here to there. Mobility is about being able to know somebody's mindset very easily, merging with other people. What else? I was once able to understand the nature of sound and be upon the sound waves and kind of have a whole holistic understanding in a fraction of a second. And there's no real laboring to understand, to know things. And you don't even have to think. And then there's this body personality. And believe it or not, your personality is not who you are. And there can be quite difficult struggles in the beginning when this personality wants to be a type A person, and the soul, the demands of it was that I give up everything. And I didn't cope well with that. So here I'm going into when I first came into the body. I was warned before, but I didn't take it seriously. My former self was warned, and I got this inner voice that said, "You're going to lose everything." I don't know what that means to most people when you get that voice, but it usually doesn't mean freak out. It usually, we're usually able to ignore warnings that are very, very inconvenient for our lives. So one night, I was just going to sleep, and I don't remember, it was a nondescript night. I went to sleep. I was in bed when I woke up being flipped Shavasana style onto my bed, like practically airborne flipped. And I was actually paralyzed in that position. I could sense beings in the room. They were highly intelligent, so they just had to think that. And it didn't even occur to me that I could will otherwise. It's almost like your whole thought process just gets suspended in air. And they lifted me out of my body. And so there I was, in deep sleep. Then the next moment, I was some feet up above my physical body. And then there were all these organs that I guess I didn't know humans had. And they were working on them. And I think in my mind, telepathically, I eked out, what the hell? And they explained things to me, but while it seemed logical, I had no scaffolding or understanding or context to know what they were doing. All I know is I had the terror of a helpless animal, and it still is one of the memories that are most salient in my mind. I can re-experience it at any time, that sense of parts of your body kind of coming out holographically, and beings that you can't see are working on them, and it feels like being microwaved in specific places, but it's hard to put into words. I guess people don't really go through this. So I felt, it was strange, I actually felt my thinking come into form, and I felt my emotions in form. The emotions were kind of like thoughts, but more emotional, more fluid, and they were able to do something that froze my thinking altogether, so that I was just terrified and observing this. And all I got was that I was getting a new heart, but everything else I couldn't quite understand. And I think what they were doing was retrofitting my body for this new soul. That was my last day for my old soul. And that's important because when you come in as consciousness into a body, there are many disembodied spirits too. And it's very important that your body responds to you as a person. So if they're going to do a stunt like they did with me, they have to actually change every single part of your body so that the new soul comes in and can direct it. Otherwise, any soul that is not embodied could just force your body to move, and that would be bad. So I didn't know that, but they changed me on a DNA level, and there were many physiological changes that very next morning. And I can't explain that, but all my bruises, my birthmarks, for instance, vanished. And I had no concept that came with the soul. I got younger, all my wrinkles disappeared. I was super hairy. Like almost all the fast-growing cells divided all at once, and I had quite a couple millimeters of nails, and I was kind of hairy all over, and I didn't understand how that happened. And on the top of my head, white hair started growing just at the crown, and just there. There was no one to guide me through this, guys. You know, my body and my brain knew that something was very wrong. Something had happened. I had flipped over for some reason, and this thing, which was not a dream, I was quite aware that I felt microwave buzzy. And the next morning, there were many permanent changes. Any pain that I had disappeared. I had a new body, effectively, and all my old habits were wiped. The way I slept, the way I walked, all the gait I had, it was brand new. I was born anew. So, let's see. I want to show you from a soul perspective now, because there's this toggling, right? There's the me that knew myself from 30 years ago, and then now there's this new being that's looking out through the eye, the one that's talking to you right now, the one that's in pilot control, right? And there I was, laying roughly in that position, because I couldn't move when I first came in. It's not as obvious as you think. People think that consciousness just suddenly knows how to maneuver the physical form, but you actually do some strange configurations with your willpower, with your emotions, and your energy force in order to move this. And I had no idea what this was. It just looked like, I guess you can call it phalanges, but it really just looked like peninsulas. I could not recognize any of this. So that first, I somehow or another, I remember being astonished by my first breath, and the fact that there was something coming into me and then out. I had no idea what respiration was, and it invaded, and that's how I opened my eyes. I didn't have a sense of eyes. I didn't know why I was locked into this straitjacket, and I never had looked in one direction. I was used to seeing all the way around. And so for some reason it looked like a periscope, and I looked out and there was the sun, and I didn't know what the sun was. I said, what the hell is that? Because light was supposed to be imminent. It was supposed to be in everything, and now there was this like one source bright thing that was quite painful to look at. And I didn't know trees, I didn't know walls, but I remember seeing my hand, and I didn't know what the hand was, kind of laying there, and hair, and I didn't know what that was either. And I thought I was trapped. I hadn't known how to move this thing. It was very much like coming into a machine. I scrambled back there for communication. I hadn't known. I spoke binary at first, and I hadn't known. There was some language files that I finally located back there in the archives, and though I had 5 and my brain said, that's pretty good, it was the most devastating thing ever to have to speak, word by word, instead of all ideas coming all at once through the heart. And that was a life sentence. I mean, that was the first moment of despair when I found those language archives. So I'm drawing this because I was trying to process how, the feeling is, but I can't describe how it was back there. I didn't know how to move this, and I didn't know where I was. All I know is that this didn't feel good immediately. I think this is a really important question. This is a really important topic, because now I go back to what I did in order to now work with weather and to work with influencing flocks of birds, or influencing even the movement of the sun or currents, because this is consciousness affecting this physical reality. So that was one of the things that experience taught me, right? That, oh wait, that's, yes?
So you're saying that the consciousness that you use to learn how to move your body is the same consciousness that you use, am I understanding it?
I'm saying that it was not natural for this to happen. When this first moved, it was a miracle to me. This just looked like an extension of a machine. In fact, the nail looked really weird. It was so strange to have skin and then have something stop right here. And I didn't know what it was for. I mean, and I reconfigured myself because the soul has different kinds of movements, and when it first comes in, it doesn't know that it's limited. So I tried to. I don't know. It's hard to describe because it's almost like you're an energy force field and you're doing like this thing or that thing, but nothing will make it move. And so remembering that panic, which I was in, and remembering what I was trying to do now informs me, wait, okay, so the body is my plane, right? My vehicle. I can, that's how I move within this suit. But all things of lower consciousness, and the body is of lower consciousness than your soul, all living things of lower consciousness can be overridden. And now when I work with people's pain, I know that. How do I know what other people are going through internally to them? Oh, okay. I'm going to move it through my soul. I'm not doing it through my brain. I'm willing it and changing my configuration energetically inside and bidding it to come out, bidding it to come to where I want it to go. It's the same thing as moving your body. So, some of the weird stuff among many, and we can go through the question. This will take forever, but I was really confused with language, and the first utterance, I didn't know what vocal cords were. And the first noise I made, I nearly broke them. I didn't know how this worked. So the first noise I made was we had a full range of interlacing sounds. It's like many, 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 many layers. That's what I remember. Not one phoneme at a time to speak an idea. So I made a noise that I've never heard in my life. It was kind of like but it was really, really outside of the range of my vocal cords. And I was stunned at the limitation of this sphere. So then wasn't aware of solids, I guess. For some reason, the brain knew, but the soul had no concept of things ever having a boundary. And so I touched everything because I said, my God, this really does seem solid. And I had no sense of touch recorded in my soul. This is a picture that simulates what your other organs look like. There are several other organs that are on the etheric level. And I guess if you took care of those, we'd be living to 150 years, but people don't see them. But those things kind of metabolize the life force so that we function properly. And I saw several of those organs, and I was quite aware of how they functioned. And those are here right now. These are pictures that I drew for myself of things that I just found totally bizarre, including my toes, which I didn't know why they looked like that, why they jutted out. I didn't know why. Why do these angles bend this way, you know? It's like, why are they opposite? And it's not obvious, you know, when you're in this new machine. And I almost felt like I would look like a Rorschach test. I was so ugly, you know? It was like, why are we split down the middle and like folded in half? That was a real concern for me. And there were so many holes in me, and I didn't know why there were holes. And I hope there are not portals, because I just couldn't really, I didn't have a concept of things. Skin, lips, my hair, I mean, these just look like cable strands. Why would they come out of your the top of you. I had no real realization, or no real familiarity with these things. It just looked like segments all over the place. We are very segmented compared to what I was, which was more or less spherical and more or less perceptive all the way around, not a cephalopod. And let's see. So the first moments, I was pretty much coming apart, not aware, not knowing what to do with this organism that now I was stuck inside. I was begging for help, and nobody could really understand the pain of it, because here's the thing. On the other side, you're suffused with God, and you're suffused with love and light, and you have this elation. And when you're here, it feels like being in the catacombs. It really felt like the way we would feel if our air supply suddenly went down to a fraction of the amount. I really felt physically, or not physically, I felt endangered, that my life source was not here anymore. And the fact that I was distant, and there was a boundary between me and the source of God, is what I call it, or whatever I was used to before. It's worse than 10,000 times the worst breakup you can think of. It just felt like there was no reason to live, and I wanted out. I wanted to shoot myself, and I had known that was possible through my brain, but my brain was, my ego was freaking out that from one day to the next, I suddenly felt extremely suicidal. But that was because I didn't have a sense of death anymore. And I didn't have a sense of all the norms here. And of course, I wasn't quite integrated into my body, so I didn't feel the value of it either. It just felt like a machine that was more or less a torture device at first. And now I'm only getting less than 1% of the information that I used to get. So it was pretty horrible. My brain, my ego, has no notion of the alarm the soul was going through. So it felt like the only thing it could deal with was, okay, you're mentally ill. You are psychotic, and you are broken. This is break point. And there I was, basically raging at the language system, or raging at things that are very, very common here, like time. Time wasn't linear before, and now this whole sense of it being stretched out and kind of, I don't know, it almost feels like a seismograph rather than having a whole experience of something. So the fact that I was really upset about it really alarmed my ego, really alarmed my brain. And so what it did to protect me is it shut down altogether too. It said, okay, here's a person that may harm herself, and the ego's role is to keep us alive. So I guess there's like a code blue function in it that says, okay, this something's severely wrong, and the best way we can do it, we're just going to knock her out. And so I spent a lot of time just sitting still and kind of being vegetative, because whatever the soul was saying was not making sense to my whole strata of knowledge that I had accumulated for what the ego felt 30 years. But in fact, the soul was new. There were some real big differences. I was feeling fields like I can still feel books, media, music. They have a sensation to me. And so I would go through my books that I had studied and notice which ones were more potent and which ones had no information whatsoever. And it's interesting because I had studied molecular biology, and nearly all of that didn't have any field, and I was kind of worried, you know. The book of calculus, for instance, had a very, very strong field. And what I got from that, because I could feel that for water, bodies of water, and what else? I could feel that for people when they were telling the truth or not. I got that. I think calculus is much more divinely inspired and pure, and there's bodies of knowledge that we learn that I've specialized in that really aren't going to last, so they don't really have integrity to them. I saw visions, very, very clear ones, clearer than my eyeballs can see because I do wear contacts. Every time I close my eyes. Future visions, visions of the distant past, or even places that I'm not supposed to access. For example, the missile bay of some bombs. I would just kind of pop in there and notice it, then come back out, and I would have all sorts of, it's exactly like floating in that very room. So you wind up feeling like you've been lied to your entire life, and everything you know you have to question because you're not really sure what's going on in this world that we think we know. And then this inner guidance, I wasn't so connected to that before, but ever since I came in as a soul, that was my lifeline. And so they would tell me things that would happen or guide me to talk to certain people, and I didn't know why. But that was a very big difference from the life I had before, which was self-willed. This was very much direct inner, greater knowing, and they were geniuses. They knew things that I didn't know how they knew. They knew answers that or protected me from car accidents. That was a very, very big shift. So I started to see with my eyes closed. I could just see, it looks different. It looks like when things are moonlit, a little bit more black and white, but it's just as clear. And I would walk around my room with my eyes closed, just touching embroidery, making sure that I was seeing this. I didn't know I didn't know blind people could see this way, for instance. And I would make plants grow for fun, and I would imbue them with life force, and they would grow better. This scared people. And the other thing I knew that was strange was when I walked, instead of this being the ground as it usually was, it almost felt like a pane of glass, and there was depth, and there were entities all around. And I don't know if you've ever watched Mario Kart or something where it's just kind of walking on this glass, whereas there's like worlds underneath and worlds above. Everywhere I went, it felt like that. It didn't feel like I was on the ground anymore. I was just on this like virtual world. Yeah, that phase change came with a ton of shocks, and meditation, thinking was one of them. Language, as I said, time and gravity was new. The staticky emanations. People, when they are not integrous, constantly emanate a sort of communication or a kind of field, and it was quite toxic. And so when I first came into form, I couldn't understand why beings here were giving off this stench or this kind of very uncomfortable, very, very painful almost emanation. But they expected me to behave as if they weren't. So people expect you to behave at face value. If they're lying to you, they expect you to go, yeah, I believe you. But there was a whole other level that I was dealing with, that I knew what they were thinking, I knew how they felt about me, and I had a really, really hard time with that. And so before I was totally individuated, I almost couldn't be around anybody, and I was in my closet a lot. Metabolism, as I said, past the future, and this, the soul had a sense of helpless rage about its situation, and I think it still does. And so when people aren't happy-go-lucky and they really feel the pain of existence, I really feel like it's a very fundamental human condition that we should accept. It is very, very hard to be here. That is a picture of when I first went outside my house the first time. For a while, everything looked like the top, and I didn't know what auras were, but everything looked really blurry and rainbowy, and everything living, and things that were loved. Like, say if I love my clothes, they would also have that mirage-looking thing coming off of it. I had certain mugs that were printed from, they were swag and they didn't have it, and then other mugs that were made, artisan made, and they had it. And I thought it was my eyes because things were kind of shimmery and moving, and I couldn't see quite clearly. And I knew how I saw before, and this was completely new. But so I would I thought of it as a pathology, but I kept on looking at things like this that wouldn't have any of the auras, and then I would look at an animal and it would just be glowing with it. When I first started walking outside, everything like that had that trait to it. And pets, I didn't understand pets because it was almost like I'm trying to drive my vehicle, but why is there like this sidekick vehicle next to a vehicle? and people would take care of this sidekick vehicle better than the other sole person that that was supposedly their kids, but I didn't understand the concept of kids because birth and death wasn't a thing. So there was like this full-formed little person vehicle that wasn't taken care of by the pimp adult vehicle, and then there was this other thing that they would lie about, and lying at the time was like an anathema to me because I knew the cost of that. For some reason, I came in, I felt like there was a whole different notion of the divine accounting system, and you couldn't lie. There was in this other world, we'd never ever thought about lying. And so now there were people lying about something for their dog, and I remember thinking, you don't have to lie about that, and do you know how much that's going to cost you? And I just had this, I wasn't very normal at the time because it's the way that we see toxic dumping now from the 18th century from factories, and you say, do you know what that does to your body if you dump into the river like that? That's how I was with a lot of soul currents. Like you cannot be so non-integrous, and that's going to cost you so much, and so it made me very antisocial. I had a lot of pain at the time too, just fitting into the body. It wasn't much larger than this. I remember thinking I was this twig thin thing. I wasn't female. I wasn't male. I didn't have a notion of gender. I didn't have a notion of age. And so those scripts had to be integrated. And moreover, I couldn't drive because I could barely move my own body normally. At first, I fell down and took a while to learn to relearn to walk. And it does feel like two chopsticks, if you think about it. It does feel like plunk, 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 plunk. I had floated before, and this was this very, very awkward, ugly way to ambulate. I had to learn to interact in the mainstream world, and that was the biggest challenge because when you define yourself as something, I had known I had come from a sphere of natural living sciences, and I had known I had come from a sphere of communication. I am not Chinese American. I am not you know, the world starts pushing definitions upon you, and it's like, no, that's not what I am. Don't you understand? I am here to do such and so with this world, and then I will go back to that sphere. I am a natural science soul and also a communication soul. I am not one of the music sphere. And I didn't know why other people didn't define themselves that way. It's almost like defining yourself by your blood type or some other small attribute like a nail or something. It's like, yes, it's true that I'm, 5'4", but who I really am, I kept on trying to impress upon people. I tried to tell my mother, I am not the graduate of the school that the other person went to. I am not the person who is here to get the job for you. I am here to bring what I knew as a soul here. And I will go back to that. I'm not going to die, don't worry. I'm not getting old. I don't have to get married to define myself. I am just fine, and I can't wait to go back. That created a lot of friction with people, because as you know, in this day and age with the partisan elections and things, people want you to be a smaller you, right? They want you to be fixed into something that they can understand, and that's not who we really are. So, this is just more drawings that I would make. I would think about time and how time works, and I would think about how to reduce anxiety in people, and I would put them into a ball, or if things had definite form to me, even though they're invisible to most people here. And I would have all sorts of understandings of why we're here, and these are kind of esoteric thoughts, but they would just kind of plant themselves in me like an encyclopedia of knowledge within a fraction of a second, and it would take me a while to unpack, and I would paint them. Of course, I got into healing not necessarily because that was a career path to me, but rather in the, how do I say it? When I first came, it was odd to me that in this dimension, there were individuals that were sick, and there were others were healthy, and they just let that individual be sick. I think in where I came from, we would have absorbed it into ourselves already. So, yeah. So it was the fact was not that I had such a wild imagination, or I thought I would do healing, or I thought I would do this. It seemed like a natural way of course in the other dimension, and so I was compelled to do it because it was the way our old culture was, let's say, and in this new culture I was not used to many things here, and aging was one of them. I thought it was just very, very bizarre that people became more and more decrepit and everybody was just fine with it. So, well, it was. So, a lot of things, if you remember how you really were, you would really find things here odd, and you wouldn't accept them as a matter of course. These are specific people that I've known. One person was north of Dallas, and I kind of mentally went there into the ER and helped. This is a friend who was in Switzerland, and he had a brain aneurysm, and he just texted me, and so I figured out where the pain points were, or where that pressure point was. It's hard to describe in pictures because it's a feeling to me. And this is a meningitis over there, and I could kind of sense that. And that's just my everyday, day after day. I also play in other forms. I have, Anne knows that I am very fond of playing with the sun. The sun, so there's no geographical distance in the soul, and there's no size, there's no distance, there's no time. And so it feels exactly like healing another person, really. And when I'm merged into the sun, this is the time that I gave myself a sunburn after midnight in my own bed in my pajamas when I merged sufficiently. And I don't know, it's just, it's a whole new world of interacting out there, and it's nothing like the person I used to be. I see crop circles and I understand them. I understand what they're trying to tell me, and they give me great hints, and it's like, oh, okay, then I can use consciousness to explore that attribute of the sun. And you can see that when you don't see through human eyes, let's say, when you don't have to remain in the reality of a human-centric world, so many worlds open up, so many different understandings open up. This, for instance, I would ask the sun, like, how do you see yourself? And it doesn't even look like the sun that we see, you know? So that's the same with health, right? It's like, okay, pain, what are you here for? Rather than the way that we normally associate pain with pathology or something wrong. It's like, pain, what are you here for? There are many, many different general areas that have shifted for me. Health and my source of vitality being internal. The weather, ecosystem, and the sun being largely malleable and influenceable through emotion. Harmonious relationships achieved through non-verbal means, right? But through the heart. It's a sort of intentional thing. And the sense of power and knowledge shifting from the definition that we have to have power over other people or power over circumstances in order to have power, but rather an internally based power and internally based knowledge that reveals itself. Okay, so I'll finish up soon, and I just want to say that there is a gradual unfoldment to this. I don't get a manual when I come in, and as I get used to this level of reality, a new portal opens up, and I can discover new other areas that I haven't known before. And so a lot of it has to do with just remaining open and taking that first step with courage, exploring, and before you're done with it, there's a whole other level for you to explore and understand. Here's a picture of one case where I would just start understanding, oh, okay, this is how a person crystallizes. And like I said, I didn't come with any of this knowledge. I wasn't particularly new age at all. But I would just have this understanding of, oh, okay, this is how a life kind of looks in form on the other side. It's invisible to us. And it's very beautiful. It's a very interesting and meaningful life. So I close with this quote: "You will experience the wide open system of creation. You will know and make use of your creative powers rather than be a helpless object in a fixed world. Your life is your creation." Thank you very much. Okay.
So we have actually ample time for questions and answers, and I'm sure you have some questions to ask Victoria. So we'd like to open it up for any questions you may have.
Yes, ma'am.
You didn't talk a lot about how the people in your life reacted to you and your new change. Like when you wake up and you're trying to figure out how to live and understand your body, but you had a fiance, you had parents. How did that?
Well, they left.
Is it because you couldn't communicate with them, or?
No, okay, so the brain is very, very limited, right? And say we have something shocking happen. You almost can't stop but talk about it and go blah, 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 right? Like say September 11th happens, everyone's talking about it, and that's a very human tendency. When you are in the presence of God or something ineffable like that, you just can't shut up. And I was slightly aware of how irritating that was, but I could not stop. It was very much like, Paul becomes Saul, and he just can't. Saul becomes Paul, and he can't stop. You just have so many volumes to say, and your whole worldview is so transformed that the average person, and not even my parents or my fiance, but very spiritual people, church people, everyone, I would gather anyone here. I mean, I knew I had very good relationships with people, and they couldn't handle it. So they left.
Did you recognize them? Did you recognize them as your family, or because you were saying you were learning everything new?
I was. How do I say this? It felt like I was going on the set of The Simpsons. So it's like you watch it all the time, but you never had that yellow skin or those, like Lisa's spiky hair. And suddenly when you have it, it's very strange, but you know all the roles, but they're not very real to you because now you're this role. And so I had people that I was aware of this big script that I better memorize, and the brain was harping at me for it. But if I had not kept a few important people, I'm pretty sure everyone could have floated away at the time, and I wouldn't have cared. But for survival needs, there was a very strong need to blend in right away and get with the program of your role. So there was no mother, like real sense of mother, whatever that means. But it was like, hey, if you're going to be here, yeah. Excuse me.
Well, once upon a time, I actually had a dream where I could see 360 degrees. And it was a long, long time ago. But I remember waking up and this forward vision that we have with a little bit of peripheral. It was a funny realization. But then I also wanted, that was just interesting when you were talking about the vision. But I also think for Christians, churches often don't spend much time contemplating the way that our Lord healed people and how we are also supposed to do the same.
Oh yeah, the Bible's a different book after you come back.
And then also his body.
Do say so. Do speak on that.
Sorry?
Do speak on that.
You just first. Joe, can you just call on people because I'm having trouble figuring out who's pulling their hands up first or second. But it's a different book because this has to do with teaching in general. People who teach you don't realize that they impose a certain interpretation the moment they teach. It's not neutral. And so everyone understands it in the way that the teacher understands it. And very often the teacher doesn't have a very good understanding of what dynamics really happened in Scripture. And so some details are overemphasized and some are not at all pointed out. And so like she was mentioning there, that we ought to be learning by Jesus' example and say, oh, okay, he does this. This is a possibility in this sphere. Instead, the emphasis is, we are not worthy. This man is really great, and we should worship rather than develop ourselves and understand that this is a physical reality that this sphere supports.
Absolutely.
Joe?
This gentleman right back here. Thank you. Really fascinating to convey as best you can the states that you're experiencing, the part that is kind of is maybe not the crucial part, but what actually happened to you, or how do you relate to being in the world now?
Like today, or?
Well, is what do you do with yourself? You talk about healing. Do you do healing? Do you stay at home and
Well, for
contemplate
instance-
the perfection of things?
No, I tend to be very, I'm 100% integrated in my body and mind now. So I do live the life of Victoria mostly. And for instance, yesterday when the volcano erupted in Guatemala, I had a stint in Chimaltenango in Guatemala before, and the people were very good to me. So I willed myself into the volcano because it had already spewed lava out. And I remember, so that's a healing, right? I merge into that system, both above ground and below ground, and I felt the pressure point and I move it down. It was kind of in my esophagus, but in a volcano, it's on the neckline area, and I can see it, and I'm just moving it down and pushing it into another dimension so that the pressure won't build up and cause more harm. And I also merge myself into the vapor system so that it can cool the ashes so that it's not so incinerating when it falls. That's one thing I do.
And I'd like to say that Victoria is available as a healer, so you can contact her.
Oh.
Reagan in the back.
Hi, Victoria.
Hi.
Okay, we met before at Ian's house, but I was wondering, okay, for the purpose of my question, I'll just call this new incarnation Victoria 2.0.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so when you came in as Victoria 2.0, and if these questions conceptually if it doesn't make sense, then you can tell me that too, but I'm trying to understand if your second incarnation, Victoria 2.0, was it like a brand new soul too, like a baby, or was this a soul from somewhere else that had already had some growth and knowledge? Because it sounds like you came into this body with a purpose and knowledge, and you were able to like remember things. Whereas if I'm born as a child, I don't necessarily, the way that on this plane we're born, I don't remember, like, I don't think when I got born, I didn't know how to walk and use my limbs, but I don't remember thinking, I don't know how to use this, like, because I just don't remember that far back. But
Right.
it sounds like you came in and you were like somehow self-aware. Yes or no?
So a baby, and by the way, it was a very interesting note. I mean, babies were very strange concepts when I first came, even though my brain knew about it. A baby is different than an adult in that the body is much more malleable and the brain is much more malleable. But also, it's going through a period of gaslighting and parental and cultural brainwashing. So when you come in as a baby, you have no chance at that vulnerable state. You have to imagine yourself as a completely dependent, soft thing that better believe in whatever the greater surroundings are telling you to believe, because it's a survival thing. Moreover, you as a child, let's see, that is a large part of the forgetting. The large part of the forgetting is craving the love of the parents and pleasing the parents, because I could see that dynamic happening, and it was extremely disturbing to me. But
we're premature actually when we come into this world too, so we're not even ready to really come out. Like, we're born and we're all, so we're like relationally totally dependent and helpless.
yeah, but you also are more flexible, so it didn't hurt as badly as it did me. I mean, it was super painful, and I got PTSD because the brain was, the thought structure was already somewhat rigid. So I was quite damaged from this entry. So.
This lady right here.
Hi, Victoria.
have you been given the knowledge as to why you were chosen for this experience and to share it? Because it's the first one that I've heard of like this. It's so interesting. But it's
No,
not
I
something
don't. I have
you're-
no idea why I was chosen. Well, I do know one. I do remember that the body selection was extremely targeted. Like, I remember asking, why am I so skinny? I mean, this is like a twig body compared to the 9-foot, 10-foot being I was for a while. And they said, you know, any more than that and the energy is lethal. Like, the energy coming in can't be sustained by something that it's just too much mass. And I suppose, because the teams that, for me coming in, it felt like a bit of amnesia. All I had was the culture shock to contrast what it was like before. I mean, everything felt very wrong. But I didn't have the whole picture. And I suppose there's also a very strong risk of suicide or kind of defecting when this happens. So they don't tell you a lot because they don't want you to know how much harder it's going to get and how people are going to be against you or how much you would have to suffer. So they just give you nuggets at a time. I didn't call myself a healer. I guess I call myself a harmonizer. That's really what I experience when I'm dealing with someone. But it can be with any system, right? It doesn't have to be a human. It can be water systems. And I knew I was good at that. And I knew I wasn't good at other things.
Anna?
Hi, I wanted to know if you know of anyone else such as yourself, and if you remember the specific reason for coming here now.
I really, really was not very spiritual, and I had thought it was happening to everybody because I had spent time in Mesoamerica and read the Popol Vuh and thought this was like the Mayan prophecies of the 2012 or something, that it must have been happening broadly. And so I wasn't very wise in discerning who I should tell the story to, because I thought at the very least of 1 out of every 2, because I wasn't that spiritual and I wasn't that special. It has only taken me, 3-4 years to figure out that, okay, no, this is just me. and for a while there, before then, I thought I was mentally ill. So I kind of brute myself with whatever anchor I could. If it weren't the Mayan prophecies, then it was, okay, I'm, kind of psychotic. Or, oh, okay, well, I didn't know that it would be, what do they say, something like 1 in a million, something quite a lot more rare than I had anticipated. Did I answer?
Yes, sir.
Swedlow.
Hey. One of the things that I've always been aware of, and I haven't heard you speak about, so I'm curious, is the collective intelligence that's arising. So you talk about being with beings, but I've always been aware that we as a species, we as a planet, we as a galaxy, know more than I as an individual. And there's a feeling of a fractalness inside. And I'm wondering, from your perspective, does that, you have a unique, I've heard that people who speak, who are multilingual, have an interesting perspective. They can see things from different perspectives. And your perspective is even kind of a broader perspective of 2 different distinct. If that has any sense of the collective intelligence, like the species feels like it's waking up to itself right now in a way, globally? Is that something that's...
Well, I sure hope so. When I first came, it still felt very, very crude. It felt very primitive. So I don't know how we are advancing, but the first notion was, I can't believe people still do this. I mean, even walking, right? I can't believe people, this is so ridiculous. I have to walk over there, or I have to touch things, or I have to explain things. Why? And I was very frustrated that we couldn't just I would just try to put my thoughts in, not just my thoughts, my entire worldview into you, and it wouldn't work here. So I suppose the more we try to raise our consciousness level, and possibility is a big part of it, right? The more you hear about somebody who says this, the more you think, okay, that could happen to somebody. And what can I do to refine myself, or to let go of thoughts that aren't serving right now? But I don't know how fast we're going. I don't have that information.
Yes, the gentleman in the dark blue shirt. Jerry.
Jerry.
Hey, Jerry. So, would you say you relate to the Matrix?
It's a good movie. I'll tell you
I
what.
relate to the Matrix.
I'll tell you what. It doesn't look like the Matrix to me. For example, it has all these codes coming down, and when I'm in, I say visions, but really I'm there. I mean, I can hear, I can smell, I can taste. It's just like being in this room, but clear. When I'm in those other worlds through consciousness, and it's a future world, say an object like this, it would just have certain things a little bit blurry if it's not fixed that it's going to happen in the future. So there are certain things that are very different from the movie. Conceptually, I don't think it's red pill, blue pill. I think there are many, many options and many degrees of being far from the truth. And that it's very alarming to me that this is a world that lies and takes lies. So our communication, which is not binary, does not inform people when something is non-integrous. And that was a strange, that was a very stupid, I was like, that's a very, very stupid way of communicating, because you couldn't, yeah. So there's many degrees of untruth. I like Cloud Atlas too, so.
Gordon?
Victoria, could you share your thoughts on what happened to previous soul or occupant?
I don't know.
Or could that have been instance of your soul being rewashed and sort of reconfigured to take a different future path?
Well, my body certainly took a different future path, but I don't know where the old soul went. I consider it a new soul because it had never had any sense of earth existence before. Because it was so paralyzed by this world initially, I don't think it has been earthbound before. And it had abilities that I didn't have before. And it had a different personality that I didn't have before.
The lady in blue.
You mentioned the therapist. How did you find someone to be able to talk with you about this, and the people that helped you? Because you said that you got some help.
Well, traditional therapists are really unqualified.
That's why I'm asking.
So I was working at Apple before, and they offered a therapist, but it's very difficult when you know what they're thinking and you're just kind of there.
Well, there is a group that the spiritual crisis, and I just wondered if you found anything like that, or.
Well, I found one who right now talks to me from Pathworks organization. That guy's in Switzerland, and we talk every week. It's more. I don't expect people to know what I'm talking about. I expect them to not treat me like I should be exiled.
Like
I don't mind if they think I'm wrong because I understand where they're coming from. And that's the thing, is that people often think that people going through a spiritual crisis want something that you can't give. But really, it's not. It's just not being kicked out and not being like left to flail on your own more than anything. But yeah, I have some therapist that is based in Switzerland that I talked to online, and there was one that was shamanic, and that was a key word for me because of the healing and the weather and that kind of work. I was very scared that when I had strong emotions and connected with the weather system, it would happen, because I didn't know where that would lead me.
Steve?
Yeah, so you do have memory of before all this happened in your life before, yes?
Mm-mm.
No memory.
Not memories the way that you think. I have a contrast.
When you worked for Apple, when you were.
Oh, I have memory of my life.
Yes.
Okay.
And so your life here on Earth, when you were a little girl, and when you were growing up, when in high school, or you remember this?
All of it, yeah.
Okay. And so, did you have any sort of premonitions that some change was coming? As you look back over that sort of breadcrumb trail, did you sense that any kind of change was about to happen?
No. No, not at all. I wouldn't have directed my life in the way that I had this happen at 30.
So this all just transpired like one night. You went to bed one night?
No, I mean, when I was 29, I had the premonition that I would lose everything, and it was, since I was Christian, it was ensconced in the parable of Abraham and Isaac, that I would have to lose everything I loved and sacrifice it at the altar. And I didn't know why. So I did that.
Right. And you were how old when this transformation took place?
I was exactly 30. They did it on my 30th birthday, and my warning was when I was exactly 30 from conception.
Okay.
So 29 and 3 months.
And so, and it happened overnight, basically?
I wasn't in time when I first came, so there wasn't overnight.
Happened suddenly.
Well, I got transplanted suddenly, but the period a day almost felt like a whole week. It was when you first come in as consciousness and you're going through this physical plane, you create some wobble in time. Time isn't, it's almost like a surface that can get wobbled, and for me, the experience was that certain days just went on and on and on, and other times just felt like 5 hours was just like 2 minutes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so what I'm going to do, I'm going to pick on folks that have not spoken yet. It's Ann and back.
Yes, I'm very curious
Yes.
about your faith, not specifically religious, but your faith in. You said you went through this really rough transition into this body, the new soul, and I'm curious. After it happened, and also today, what is that faith or notion that keeps you here, keeps you in this plane of existence, participating?
I was in the light, and that light is a very personable light, and it is all the superlatives that all the religions talk about, and yet none of it at all. And when you have that experience, there is nothing outer right now that can convince me of my worthlessness, or that what I'm saying is not real, because that light was the formative experience of my entire sense of what's beyond. And I wanted to merge with that light, and I was quite aware. It's a very incinerating light. It's not the way that people think. It's whatever impurities that we have, it's not compatible with it. It's very, very pure. And so what was quite aware even then of how much I had to go to purify myself in order to merge with it. And this plane is a very good place to work on being more compatible with the union of that light.
We have time for one more question. Jack.
Not sure how to ask this, but I understand that you said you have not encountered anyone else who's gone through a similar experience of a soul or spiritual transplant or upgrade or however you want to call it. But have you encountered another individual who has developed their spiritual or soul connection on a conscious level and had some of your abilities or understanding?
Well, I love the near-death experiencers group. I love all of them because they know what it's like from one day to the next to completely, radically change your life. And they know that in the presence of the divine, it shifts everything, right? And the way we manifest it here may be different, right? Like I can be doing this and you can be doing that. But really, it's the climate of the heart and what we're doing moment to moment with the climate of the heart, no matter how our tools make that manifest, that's more important. And so I'm not even that interested in finding somebody like me. I'm not sure if I want to know. You know, I mean, people think that I want to find someone like me, and I'm like, no, I'm trying to be normal, guys.
Interesting. Thank you.
Victoria, in closing, if I was to ask you if you could leave one nugget
For these earthlings, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but what might you share with us?
Sure.
In closing.
Wow, I was very astonished by the poetry of God and how every little thing matters. Sometimes, at least from my life before, I didn't feel like a lot of things that I did, whether this way or that way, mattered at all. But it does. Every slight detail is recorded. Every small attribute is registered. And so have courage. Have courage to push yourself, knowing that things matter.
Thank you.
Okay.
I am Chinese American, and I will tell you, I will never think about chopsticks the same ever again. That was really interesting.
It's true. It's like stilts.
I use chopsticks before I use knives and forks. Thank you for coming. I trust you found what Victoria shared with us to be interesting. But let me leave you with a thought here. I think a lot of folks probably have never heard of a story like this, particularly in first person. But since we're in an ions form here, let me suggest to you, give some thoughts when you're on your own time as to what Victoria has to share. How does that speak to us? How might that speak to my own sense of humanity? How might that speak to my purpose on this planet in whatever time I have? And how that might speak to what my own soul purpose is. I think you left us quite a few nuggets, actually. So again, thank you for coming.